here we have the continuation of the break, which is funny, but I'll talk more about that in a moment. First, before we go any further, there's really two halves to this episode, and they kind of bounce between them, but let's talk about the Mars... let's talk about the Mars resistance stuff first. Poor Marcus. Poor Franklin. You could be stuck with your best friend in a confined space for a long period of time, and it will suck. Trust me, it will suck. It's not the kind of thing you really want to do for an extended period of time. Doesn't matter how close friends you are. Doesn't matter how much you care about each other. After a while, you just kind of get sick of each other. Especially as you continue to be uncomfortable, or things are unpleasant, or you haven't eaten properly, or you don't have the ability to take a good night's sleep, all that fun stuff, right? All those things that help to make us more capable of dealing with the crap in our lives. You take all that away, and your skin just gets thinner and thinner and thinner until you're about ready to frickin' kill someone. Then, of course, they meet Captain Jack. No relation to Doctor Who. Although he does actually act kind of like that, but anyways. He's their contact, of course. Good actor, good presentation, and he behaves pretty amicably. He's got surprisingly well. He's got a good setup. He's got actual self-heating food packets with meat and potatoes. And oh god, that sounds good right now. Any of you got some meat and potatoes I can borrow really quick? I'm hungry. So he's their contact. He's helping them into the Mars situation. But what's really, really funny to me, some people have argued that this is trying to make a stand for same-sex marriage stuff, when it's kind of trying to do the opposite of that. Or I shouldn't say that. The inverse of that, not the opposite. JMS flat out said it was kind of risky doing that. This was I actually wrote down the date. This came out April 21st, 1997. Now, I don't know how many of you were around in 1997, but where I was from, which is the west coast of the States, there was a fairly strong anti-homosexual wave that was going through there pretty much just a few years before that. So seeing this kind of a same-sex thing was making more waves than it really should have been. Here's the thing, though. I like how he does it. I have argued stridently against anyone who's been like, oh my god, he was just doing this big whole issue, except he wasn't. Note he does two things with it. First of all, he brings in some light comedy. And note that I say light comedy, not heavy comedy. There's no mockery. There's no, ha ha, you get to go through this unpleasant circumstance. There's none of that sort of cruelty behind the laughter. Marcus is just trying to get Franklin to lighten up a bit, and so he just kind of goes with it in order to try and get a laugh out of him. He even succeeds. That's the difference between light joking and heavy joking. I don't want to call it any specific episodes, but there's some episodes over in Star Trek, all of Star Trek, that tend to do heavy mocking, where I'm going through this horribly unpleasant thing, like actually unpleasant thing, and rather than getting sympathy or help or any kind of understanding, people are just like ha ha, point and laugh at the freak. So I like this approach to it. And second of all, it's not really made a big deal. It's come up a couple of times for the lighthearted thing, but it's not like anyone looks and says, oh yes, as you know, in this day and age, homosexual marriages are allowed and legal. They don't have to do that. They just mention that they happen to have that, and they're set up at the honeymoon suite and all that fun stuff, and that's it. Don't really need to go into that. And for that reason, I'm not going to go into it anymore. I just thought I'd share. Moving on. I really love the line, the bit in the mag tube, both bits actually, but I'm talking about the former one. Obviously there's the lighthearted stuff I referenced, but then there's the line, I forget exactly how he says it, but I wrote down, what war? Oh my god, what war? What war? Remember, we basically just beat Sauron and the entire armies of Mordor, and we have just defeated them for the first time in the history of the ever, and kicked the Vorlons and the Shadows out of our galaxy permanently, along with all of the other first ones. What war? Now, at first, that's just kind of horrifying. And at first, you might be thinking, God, how many other people don't know the truth of what happened? But then the reality starts to sink in. No, it's not everyone, it's Mars. Mars is on a media lockdown from Earth. And it's not just the fact that they're not broadcasting, they have blockers up. We actually see a demonstration of what this is like. Because Sheridan starts flipping through the channels. The adult channel? Really? And as he's flipping through the channels, they're all blocked. You can white noise just about any transmission unless it's got a sufficient power behind it to ensure that transmissions don't get through. And any transmissions that do get through are the kind that have to have so much power to get through that they'll be aware of what they are and what they're doing, and will give away information. So it's a pretty effective strategy. But the point is, Mars has been under lockdown for over a year now. Remember, the whole Mars revolt thing happened quite some time ago in the show's history, even in lore, not just in real life. And I bring that up because it's foreshadowing, because it means they don't actually know the people from B5 are really coming, which leads into the incident later. But more importantly, it's a little bit of a peek of what could happen with Babylon 5, who is under the same circumstances. The only difference is Mars has been like this for over a year at this point. Babylon 5 just started, so yeah. That's also relevant with the way that the Martian people interact with each other, and especially with our heroes, with Marcus and Franklin. They look at them like just incredibly untrustworthy. I mean, the way, I swear the director turned to the actor who was playing number 2 and basically said, act like an evil gangster. That type of performance is the kind of thing you usually see playing someone who is evil, obviously evil, almost cartoonishly evil. But it fits, because these people have been so ground into the dirt and so harried and so harassed that even when help comes, they're not sure it's help, or that it's there for them, or that they're there at all. That is the true insidiousness of what the Clark administration's attacks, if you will, on Mars have been doing. Yeah, there was bombing, yeah, there was martial action, but this kind of stuff, you make sure that they are so paranoid that even people who genuinely want to help them have a hard time doing so, because it's so difficult for them to accept help. And that could be what happens to Babylon 5 if things keep going badly. When did Captain Jack get a keeper? I mean, I'm sorry, I'm giving it away. They don't actually call them that yet. That is a keeper that he had on his shoulder, the same as the Regent. I can't think of his name still, in a previous episode. So he's got a keeper now. There's a lot of questions that should be answered about that I don't believe ever will be. But that is the first thing that came to my mind. When did they get a keeper on him? We learn a significantly more amount about how a keeper actually works in this episode. We've had some idea thanks to the episode where Sheridan goes into the future, but here it's laid out completely. The keeper pretty much flat out controls the host. Just full tilt. And they can do indirect things. In fact, Franklin points out like every indirect thing Captain Jack had been doing. And I gotta admit, I only noticed 2 of those my first watching this. I thought it was indicative of the fact that he was not their actual contact, that he was some other guy. But then that didn't quite line up, and I didn't know what to make of it. And then, of course, maybe it was a shapeshifter. I mean, we haven't really seen much with shapeshifting in this show, just a few tidbits. But no, it was the keeper. It was basically mind control, and he was trying to get hints out. I feel so bad for Captain Jack. He also gives what is, in my opinion, the single most horrifying quote in the entire show. They always grow back. We'll learn more about keepers as we go, so I'm going to cut off that conversation there, but... Switching over to the other thing, Ivanova more or less literally forces Sheridan to take a day off. Given what happens, I don't think she did him a good favor on that one, because on the one hand, he has his relaxed time with Delenn. This is still more of the break part of the episode. It's still part where it's still kind of lighthearted, but I gotta be blunt. Even if I admit the love of my life, and the love of my life is like, oh, I totally love you, Lore Runner. I don't know why I'm calling you that, but just go with it. And she was like, hey, so we have a ritual to do. And I'd immediately like, okay, I'm not big on rituals, or traditions, for that matter. Significance, symbolism, yeah, sure. But... So she's like, oh, we have to do something. I'm like, all right, what? She's like, we have to slowly discover each other's, I can't even say it, pleasure centers, while friends and family are going to be meditating and praying just outside the door and making sure things don't go too far. No, that's a deal breaker. I'm sorry, I love you, but let's just be friends. No, holy crap. Not going through with that. Sheridan is way braver of a man than I am. Of course, he's a military general, so that makes sense. So, and that's part of the lighthearted stuff. But then Sheridan approaches Garibaldi as a friend. And he doesn't understand what's going on. And Sheridan gets actually angry about the situation, really lets his temper go. Now, what's funny is Sheridan pushes him point blank, and Garibaldi never actually really answers his question. Sheridan flat out says it felt like we were going around in circles. Note, pay very close attention to how Garibaldi pushes his argument and what he says to support it, because the answers are aggressively and nothing, respectively. Garibaldi never brings up one iota of any kind of proof that Sheridan, specifically Sheridan, is letting this get to his head. Now, yeah, the lady in a later scene walks up and is like, oh my god, do this. What was Sheridan doing? Oh yeah, that's right. Pushing her away and saying, no, stop. Right? Has he ever done anything to add any credence to Garibaldi's claims? No. And with even a secondary pass of thinking about it, it becomes apparent that there is no evidence to Garibaldi's claims. And whenever pushed on it, he just defaults to that. Like, he just shifts stance. Anytime he's pushed or questioned or someone tries to be friendly or get to him, he just, no, he's crazy, he's got this thing and he's just being pushed and aliens and blah, blah. He just shoves it down there. Forces it. And what I really like is after his rant, Sheridan gets right up in his face and says, I don't buy it. Now, Sheridan doesn't understand, so he just assumes this is crummy behavior. But he's saying he walks away. But it's the second time someone has not bought into what Garibaldi is saying. The first time was Zach. Zach picked up on that too. Then the Clark people, let's just call them that. I don't even think they had guest star names. I mean, like, character names. They were just evil people. Try to get to Garibaldi. And what's interesting is Garibaldi doesn't want to sell Sheridan out. He pretty much says no. He knows what they're asking of him, and he's like, no. But he finally does relent after being pushed in exactly the right direction that needs to be pushed. But I wonder how much of that is actually him at that point. Sheridan, shortly thereafter, regrets exploding on the situation. It's just, I can't believe this happened. He's embarrassed about it. He even approaches Garibaldi and says, I'm sorry. Let's try this again. And then things get out of control again. Ironically, I wonder how that would have gone if the alien lady hadn't been like, oh, you're some savior or whatever. Before I go forward, I just have a side note that I want to mention here. I really like the carrot and the stick scene with Ivanova. It's just pure Ivanova being Ivanova. It's one of the reasons why Ivanova is so many people's favorite character in this show, is because of scenes like that. And it very much is carrot and the stick. You work with us, we'll do all this stuff for you. You don't, you're screwed. Go, do it. Oh, we'll also turn you in, and it's... Ivanova reaches for extremes. I've seen the mentality behind this, and it actually makes a weird amount of sense to me. If you work with me, I will be very nice to you. But if you go against me, I will be very against you. It's like extreme carrot and the stick. It's kind of similar to what the Dominion does over in Star Trek Deep Space Nine. Yes, I just compared Ivanova to the Dominion. I think that's a fair comparison. Back to Garibaldi. So, I was reminded of it because they mentioned that the reason that oh God, I suddenly can't think of his name. The guy who plays Garibaldi was slowly going bald over the course of the series, and they mentioned that that's because of something with I didn't know what was going to happen. I have a question for you. First of all, do you think Sheridan went too far? Garibaldi literally slugs him. Sheridan says back off, and says, all right, you get that one for free next time I take your head off. And Garibaldi's even upset at himself about it. But my question to you is, do you think Sheridan went too far? I bring that up because I've actually heard friends postulate that exact same point. Sheridan should have kept reaching out to him. Sheridan should have kept going for it. And while that may actually be true, that wouldn't be Sheridan. Do you mind if I share a quick story from my own real-life past? I was in third or fourth grade. I'm actually not sure which, because I had both at the same school. And I had to go to the bathroom, so I'm going into the bathroom. There were a bunch of kids there blocking the way. So, what's my first response? Please move. No. These were bullies, by the way. I'll just speed that up on you. These were people who were being dicks about it, as opposed to just, obstinate. So I'm like, let away. And they're deliberately like, no, we're not letting you in. And I'm like, okay, I've got to go pee, guys. Let me in. And they're like, no. So I try to ignore them and just push through. So they actually pushed me back. We'll fast forward a bit. I was in the principal's office for having beaten the living crap out of the 4 kids. I was a good fighter back when I was a kid. Now, I'm not ashamed of that. In no way do I feel remorse or regret for beating the living snot out of those 4 kids. And the reason why is because of the exact circumstances and because of what my mom taught me when I was growing up. You try diplomacy first, you try avoidance second, and then you push back. And that's exactly what I did. And that's what Sheridan does. He tries diplomacy first. He tries avoidance second. And then he is literally slugged. So, he lets him have that slug and pushes back. I am not going to let you push me around. That is very in character for Sheridan. He is not as diplomatic as, well, in Sinclair, even. He's certainly not as diplomatic as several other characters I can mention, like like Picard over on Star Trek, for example. It's not his thing. He's a military commander, not a diplomat. So, to me, I see no problem with the way he pushed back at Garibaldi. But that does bring up a second question. I wonder if it would have been better if we had never seen the flashbacks or the scenes of Garibaldi being brainwashed. We saw him back, in the tomb. That's because that's what it was. We've seen flashbacks to him being brainwashed, and we saw him getting that coded message, the control type thing, right? All of these things have pretty much flat out said to the audience, yeah, no, Garibaldi's being controlled. Would it have... This is an honest question. I don't give my opinion. But do you think it would have been better if they had never given us that? If instead it had been... Just remove all of those scenes from it, so it just looks like Garibaldi legitimately has quit because he's upset about Sheridan, and he's upset about this whole messianic complex thing, and he's upset about the whole situation and wants to have his little peace of mind and blah, blah, blah. Make the audience think, ergo, that Garibaldi has legitimately started turning towards the bad guy's side of things. I don't know if that would be better or not. And what's funny is everything I've been pointing out in the last several episodes about Garibaldi's behavior, his word choice, his argumentative style, all of that would remain absolutely true, because all you're doing is removing the mind-controlled scenes. So his own demeanor and his method of how he presents himself remains the same. So all the hints would be there. They would just be much quieter. It would be up to us to decide, is he really wigging out? Or something up? And then episodes like this one could lend further credence to the fact that Garibaldi is actually legitimate. Because this is probably the closest episode to where, if I didn't know any better, I would say, okay, maybe there is something going on here, as opposed to just a mind control situation. Maybe Garibaldi's got a legitimate complaint here, and that needs to be worked out. I don't know. Food for thought. Anyways, let's go ahead and move on to the next episode. The episode of Killing All the Things. Oh, I'm sorry. Actually, no, I wanted to say one last thing. I forgot, as I glanced down at my notes. The reason I say this is kind of the end of the break, this is perfect. So the previous episode was kind of lighthearted. Well, I'm sorry, wrong terminology. The previous episode was kind of a breather episode and was covering backstory. This episode is kind of a lighthearted episode, And between these two, we have a fairly effective, breather path after the nightmare of the Shadow War and covering the now what with President Clark. But then this episode ends on two very dark notes, clearly indicating, oh God, this isn't over. This is in fact still getting worse. First note, the Keeper. It always grows back. And we know now that there are those things which we, the audience, have enough of a brain to associate with the shadows in some manner or another. Lord knows where they actually come from, but yeah. The second thing, this is important too, Garibaldi has officially and formally joined the enemy. Those nameless guys, they never say who they're working for or why, but they do name drop the President and Clark multiple times. It's very clear that they are working for the Clark administration. I don't know if they're working for whoever mind-controlled Garibaldi, but they're definitely working with the Clark administration. So they are definitively the bad guys, and Garibaldi just formally joined them. Yeah. See you next time, guys.